Hi everyone, I'm Haley Madden and I'm going to be an ELL teacher. So I will be teaching English to speakers of other languages. In the high school my cooperating teacher works at, all grades of English language learners are combined, so I plan these instructional strategies for grades ranging from 9th through 12th and keep in mind that they can be differentiated for individual students accordingly. The first thing I'd like to talk about is behaviorism. Because behaviorism focuses on small amounts of information or recalling facts, I think sight words and spelling fall under this category nicely. With high schoolers, a major motivator is competition. I could split up students into teams and have one student come up from each team at a time and compete against each other to spell the word correctly. This same method could work with any sort of fact recollection as well. A lot of the students in ESL in high school are struggling in their science classes, so I could also use behaviorism to provide direct instruction specifically in this content, and it would be a great time for students to ask questions and receive clarification on concepts they might not understand well. Now let's talk about the constructivist theory. I love the constructivist theory for its focus on student-to-student interaction. Conversation is one of the most important features of second language acquisition, so the more I can get my students to converse with each other, the better. Activating prior knowledge is also a huge part of teaching my students because it really helps them make connections with the English language and their past experiences. For my instructional strategy, I'll use an example from one of the lessons I'm teaching next week. I'm teaching a lesson on the moon and outer space, and I can't assume that all the students have learned anything about this subject, and some may not have even heard the word moon. There may be extreme diversity in the comprehension of English in a 9th through 12th grade ESL classroom. To begin, I will put students in partners, and they will have a few minutes to fill out a joint KWL chart. This portion falls under student interaction. If you don't want to assign partners, you could even make a KWL chart as a class. Next, I made a PowerPoint with pictures that goes over the basics of the moon. It has slides about the moon's surface, astronauts, craters, meteorites, etc. Using visuals, I will be activating prior knowledge. We will also be talking about the sign that Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin left on the moon. Because the constructivist theory highlights experiences and simulations, I could ask my students to imagine that they are going to the moon and their assignment is to create their own sign to leave on it. This could also be done individually or in small groups. Another example you could use for this theory is by making a comparison chart between the moon and the Earth. The Earth has air, water, and plants, but does the moon? This type of chart is a great way to differentiate for students' learning strategies. The lower level students will be paired with speakers who will challenge and push them conversationally, and the advanced students will be able to practice academic language by speaking and explaining concepts to the other students. Anything I can do as a teacher to get out of the way, be a facilitator, and let my students interact with one another aligns with this theory well. I don't think there is an end-all be-all learning theory, but I do think it's best to incorporate all of them into your classroom. In fact, when I started thinking about specific instructional strategies, I realized how naturally these theories come together at different points throughout any given lesson. However, because I must choose one that I believe most aligns with my teaching methodology, I suppose that one would be cognitivism. The reasons I love the cognitive learning theory, especially for grades 9 through 12, is because I think metacognition is so important at this age. What I desire most as a teacher is to teach my students how to think for themselves. Thus, cognitivism really resonates with me because one of its central themes is to encourage your students to be independent learners. Another reason I love cognitivism is because of its focus on the zone of proximal development. Scaffolding is obviously important in any type of classroom, but I feel ZPD can really help English language learners feel confident in the content I present. It also helps me as a teacher to understand what my students can do unassisted and making sure I'm at that sweet spot of challenging my students without reaching frustration level. English language learners feel frustrated many times throughout the day because of the lack of communication they have academically and socially speaking, and I think Vygotsky's ideas are a great way to encourage my students and get them excited about learning. An instructional strategy based on cognitivism that I'll be using frequently is having my students summarize a task, story, or event. We read a lot of stories, and I always try to incorporate listening, reading, writing, and speaking into each lesson I make. I can do this by having my students work together in small groups and match certain prefixes and suffixes together, mapping out ideas together after we read an article, connecting students' prior knowledge to new analogies, etc., etc. The instructional strategy options are pretty much endless for these learning theories, and I'm so excited to use a mixture of each of them every day in the classroom. Thanks for listening.